She murdered her closest friend and claimed her home, if only she had realized. The jealous flame. In the heart of Utoni village, where red earth met endless skies, two women grew up like sisters. Amina and Zulay were inseparable, laughing under the baobab trees, sharing calabashes of palm wine, and dreaming of futures wrapped in golden promise. But as the years passed, the threads that held their bond began to fray. Amina, beautiful and bold, had always been the village's golden girl. But it was Zulay, quiet and cunning, who had the patience to wait for fortune. When Amina married Alamade, the wealthy cocoa trader with land and livestock, Zulay smiled on the outside. On the inside, bitterness brewed like a storm. Zulay married too, but her husband was a drunkard who spent his days sleeping and his nights gambling. Their hut was a lean-to compared to Amina's wide compound with painted walls and goats bleating in the yard. Amina would often bring food for Zulay, a gesture that felt more like charity than friendship. One rainy afternoon, the seeds of betrayal finally sprouted. Amina invited Zulay for lunch. As they sat on woven mats and shared cassava stew, Amina beamed. "I have news," she whispered, touching her belly. "I'm with child." Alamade is overjoyed. Zulay forced a smile, her stomach tightening with envy. That child would inherit everything. The compound, the wealth, the respect. And Zulay, what did she have? Hunger and a hut. Later that evening, Zulay walked home under the weight of jealousy so thick it made her heart pound. By the time she reached her doorstep, her mind had already begun to whisper dangerous things. What if Amina was gone? The idea took root like a weed. Over the following days, Zulay's visits became more frequent, her tone sweeter. She offered to help with chores, brought herbs for Amina's pregnancy, and shared calming teas. No one suspected her growing hatred. Even Amina, glowing with maternal joy, never sensed the danger. Then one night, under a crescent moon, Zulay made her move. She brought a mixture she claimed would ease Amina's swelling feet. It was laced with poison, slow and silent. Over the next 2 weeks, Amina weakened. Her laughter dulled, her steps faltered, and one morning, Alamade found her cold and breathless beside their marriage bed. The village mourned. Alamade was broken. The unborn child was gone too. Zulay wept with the others, wailing and beating her chest. But in secret, she smiled. Weeks turned into months, and Zulay's plan moved forward. She began visiting Alamade, comforting him. Slowly, she offered food again, this time to him. Grief-stricken and vulnerable, Alamade leaned on her. Within 6 moons, they were wed. Now Zulay stood at the heart of the compound she had once envied, queen of the home she had stolen. But strange things began to happen. Amina's favorite bird, a red-crested hornbill, returned daily to perch on the rooftop, crying into the dusk. At night, Zulay heard footsteps on the porch, bare feet shuffling like someone carrying life within. And each morning, she found Amina's wedding beads in a different place, though she had buried them deep in a calabash beneath the kitchen floor. Zulay tried to ignore it, claiming wind or forgetfulness. But her soul knew. The home she had claimed was not empty. It had never been. She murdered her closest friend and claimed her home, if only she had realized. Whispers in the walls. The compound looked the same, painted walls, freshly swept courtyard, goats resting under the mango tree, but to Zulay, it felt colder, heavier. Every corner held a shadow that whispered Amina's name. She tried to settle into her new role as Alamade's wife. She wore Amina's clothes, filled her seat at the village meetings, and slept in the same bed where Amina once dreamed of motherhood. But nothing brought peace. At night, Alameda tossed and turned, haunted by visions he couldn't name. She comes to me, he murmured one morning, rubbing sleep from his eyes. I see her. Standing beside the bed. Zulei's hands froze mid-sweep. You must be dreaming, she said too quickly. But it wasn't just Alameda. Their house girl, Tenny, barely 15, refused to go into the back room where Amina used to sit and weave. There's someone in there, she whispered to Zulei one evening. She hums lullabies even when no one is home. Zulei slapped the girl and warned her never to speak such nonsense again. But that night, when Zulei passed the weaving room, she heard the soft tune of a lullaby, Amina's favorite one, the same she sang under the baobab tree before announcing her pregnancy. Zulei's breath caught in her throat. She began to have dreams, Amina, dressed in white, eyes hollow and sorrowful, walking slowly through the compound with blood dripping from her fingers. In each dream, Amina would turn and whisper the same thing, return what is mine. By day, Zulei tried to act normal. She visited the market, smiled at neighbors, and told herself she was imagining things. But her skin itched constantly, and she began to feel watched, even when alone. One afternoon, as she fetched water from the clay pot by the kitchen, she saw something that turned her bones to ash. There, pressed into the damp earth, were two sets of barefoot prints, one large, one small. As though a mother and child had walked through the compound. But she and Alameda had no child. She stared at the prints, heart racing, then poured the water on them quickly to erase the evidence. But water couldn't wash away guilt. Desperate, Zulei went to the old herbalist, Baba Oro, a man feared and respected for speaking with the dead. She entered his dark hut, her veil pulled low. I need cleansing, she said softly. Baba Oro stared into her eyes for a long moment, then muttered, you carry a death on your skin. Zulei flinched. What do you mean? The one you wronged lingers. She has not passed. She watches. I didn't. You took what was not yours, Baba Oro growled, voice like rustling leaves. The earth knows. The spirits know. And now the walls know. Zulei left shaken, her hands trembling as she returned to the compound. She tried to burn herbs, scatter ash, recite chants Baba Oro gave her, but the haunting only grew stronger. One morning, Alameda found the calabash hidden beneath the kitchen floor. Inside were Amina's wedding beads, stained with blood. He stared at them, then at Zulei, his eyes full of questions. Zulei opened her mouth to speak, but a wind rushed through the compound, slamming doors and rattling windows. From the back room, the sound of a baby crying echoed, loud and clear. But there was no baby. Zulei's heart pounded. The home she had stolen was alive. The child beneath the hearth. After the discovery of the calabash, Alameda changed. He no longer looked at Zulei with the warmth he once did. Instead, his eyes were clouded, full of questions he was afraid to ask aloud. Zulei noticed. He spoke less, stayed longer at the cocoa farms, and often sat outside the compound late into the night, staring into nothing. The air between them had thickened, heavy with things unsaid. Zulei tried to pretend everything was normal. She cleaned more, prayed louder, and forced meals into bowls that no one wanted to eat. But even the goats had stopped coming near the house. They bleated nervously and avoided the steps. One hot afternoon, Zulei heard a scratching sound beneath the hearth where firewood was kept. It was faint at first, like a rat. But as she knelt to investigate, she heard something chilling, soft breathing. Then a quiet giggle. Her blood turned to ice. No child lives here, she whispered to herself, trying to control her shaking hands. No child. But as she rose to her feet, something tugged at her wrapper. She spun around. Nothing. Only dust and silence. That night, she dared not sleep. She sat in the main room with a lantern flickering beside her, its light casting strange shapes on the mud walls. Around midnight, she heard a voice. A small, fragile voice humming, Amina's lullaby. Zule covered her ears, but the sound grew louder until it felt like it was coming from inside her own chest. She stood abruptly and began to pray, calling on every spirit and name she had ever heard whispered by elders. Suddenly, the lantern shattered. Darkness swallowed the room. A wind rushed through the compound, carrying with it the sound of a woman weeping. Then, silence. The next morning, Olamide returned home early. His face was pale, and his hands shook as he held a wooden rattle in his palm. "I found this outside, by the graveyard," he said, voice hollow. "It belonged to the unborn child. Amina carved it herself." Zule stepped back. Why would it be there? Olamide looked at her for a long time. "That's what I've come to ask you." Zule's lips moved, but no words came. That night, he refused her touch. He locked his door and slept alone. The isolation drove her into madness. She dug behind the hearth, convinced a child was buried there. She pulled up stones, tore through the earth with bleeding hands, searching for something, anything, that would explain the haunting. All she found was a single bead from Amina's necklace, buried deep in the soil. She screamed. The villagers began to talk. Some said Zule was cursed. Others said Amina's spirit had returned for revenge. Tenny, the house girl, had fled the compound days earlier and refused to return, telling people that she had seen Amina's shadow brushing Zule's hair in the night. And still, the hauntings continued. The baby's giggle echoed down the hall. Wet footprints appeared in the yard after dry nights. The bed groaned under invisible weight. And every mirror in the house cracked, one by one. Zule knew now, she had not just killed a friend. She had stolen a future. A home. A legacy. But Amina was not gone. She and her unborn child remained, trapped between worlds, anchored to the house that once held their dreams. And they were growing restless. The visitor from the river. The villagers whispered now when Zule passed. Some crossed themselves. Others turned their faces away. The laughter that once echoed from her compound had long died. In its place came cries, soft and strange, rising in the night like smoke. Zule had grown thin. Her eyes were sunken, skin pale. She barely ate. She wandered the compound barefoot, muttering to herself. Even Olamide now kept his distance. He had begun sleeping at the farmstead, leaving the house to its ghosts and the woman he no longer trusted. One day, desperate and unraveling, Zule made her way to the river. The elders said spirits moved easily near water. She needed to know, was Amina truly dead, or did something far worse now live in her place? At the riverbank stood an old woman washing calabashes. Her back was bent like a crescent moon, and her hair was white as ash. When she looked up, Zule froze. The woman's eyes were milky, blind. But they stared straight through her. "You are the one," the old woman said, as though she'd been waiting. "The one who walked into another woman's destiny." Zule stepped back, heart thudding. Who are you? Names are for the living. But I see the dead. And they follow you." Zule fell to her knees. "Please, I didn't mean for it to happen. I was angry, jealous. I didn't know the spirits would cling to me." The old woman laughed, a dry, creaking sound. "You killed a mother and stole her place. But you didn't just kill her body. You buried her spirit before its time. I buried her deep. I tried to forget. I tried to move on. The woman leaned forward. But the land never forgets. The earth drank her blood, and now it cries out. You must return what you took. Zule wept into the sand. How? I cannot bring her back. No, the old woman said. But you can give her peace. You must cleanse the compound, speak the truth, and call her name aloud under the moon. Only then will she decide if you are worthy of forgiveness. That night, Zule did as told. She lit a fire in the center of the compound and stood beneath the full moon. With trembling hands, she scattered herbs over the flames. Smoke rose like ghosts into the air. I killed you, Amina, she cried, voice cracking. I gave you poison and took your home. I was jealous, cruel, and wicked. And I am sorry. The wind screamed through the compound. The flames flickered. And then, Amina appeared. She was bathed in moonlight, her belly still swollen with child. Her eyes, full of sorrow, stared into Zule's soul. She said nothing, only raised her hand and pointed toward the kitchen. Zule turned slowly. From the shadows emerged the small figure of a child, transparent, glowing, eyes wide with sadness. The spirit child reached for her, but she could not touch him. Then Amina spoke for the first time. You took our peace. Now give it back. Zule collapsed to the ground, sobbing. I will do anything. Amina's figure began to fade, the child with her. But before disappearing completely, she whispered, tell them the truth. Or we will remain. And then, only the wind remained. Zule lay on the ground until dawn, the guilt pressing on her like a mountain. Her heart knew what must come next. She had to confess, even if it meant losing everything. Even if it meant her life. Here is chapter 5 of, She Murdered Her Closest Friend and Claimed Her Home, if only she had realized. Chapter 5, The Weight of Truth. Morning in Utoni village was usually filled with rooster crows and the clatter of market stalls. But on this day, silence ruled. Word had spread like wildfire. Zule had called for a village gathering. The same Zule who barely spoke, who had become a ghost in her own stolen home. The elders sat under the ancient Iroko tree. Children clung to their mothers. Women with headscarves whispered behind cupped hands. Olamide stood on the edge of the gathering, arms crossed, a hard expression on his face. Zule stepped forward barefoot, her wrapper dusty, eyes hollow. Her voice trembled, but it carried across the crowd. I have wronged this village, she began. I have wronged the spirits. And I have wronged Amina. Gasps rippled through the crowd. I poisoned my closest friend. I watched her fade before me. I buried the evidence and claimed her place. Mothers clutched their daughters tighter. The herbalist, Baba Oro, closed his eyes and began humming a low tune. Zule continued. I was driven by envy. Her happiness reminded me of my own emptiness. I thought that if I had what she had, I would be whole. But instead, I invited her ghost into my bed, her cries into my walls, and her child's spirit into my sleep. Her knees gave way, and she dropped to the ground. Forgive me, she begged. Or punish me. But let her rest. The village was silent. Even the wind seemed to pause. Then the oldest elder, Mama Kofo, stood. Her voice was strong, ageless. You have spoken the truth. But truth does not erase blood. It only begins the cleansing. A goat was slaughtered as sacrifice. The blood was sprinkled around the compound's four corners. Elders chanted into the soil, calling on the spirits of the ancestors to witness the confession. But it was not enough. That night, Zule sat alone by the fire when Olamide approached. He said nothing at first, only stared at her like a stranger. You killed her, he finally said, voice low. And still I married you. Tears filled her eyes. I lied to you. I lied to everyone. Did you love me? He asked. I didn't know what love was until it turned into grief. He said nothing for a while, then turned to leave. I'm leaving at dawn. This house, this marriage, I can't stay. Zulay watched him walk away, and something inside her crumbled. She had lost her friend, her honor, her husband, and soon, the house itself. But even after all that, the spirits had not left. At midnight, the crying returned, this time louder, urgent. She ran to the back room, heart racing. There, in the moonlight pouring through the cracked roof, stood Amina again, closer this time. Her face held no anger, only sorrow. You confessed, she whispered. But that alone does not free us. What more must I do? Zulay cried. Amina pointed to the floor. Beneath the hearth, the earth still holds what you buried. Zulay's eyes widened. The final truth, the poisoned bottle, the dried herbs, the last thread of her sin, was still hidden. She knew then what must come next. The haunting would not stop until everything she buried, physically and spiritually, was brought into the light. And some things, once unearthed, might destroy her for good. The weight of truth. Morning in Utoni village was usually filled with rooster crows and the clatter of market stalls. But on this day, silence ruled. Word had spread like wildfire. Zulay had called for a village gathering. The same Zulay who barely spoke, who had become a ghost in her own stolen home. The elders sat under the ancient Iroko tree. Children clung to their mothers. Women with headscarves whispered behind cupped hands. Alameda stood on the edge of the gathering, arms crossed, a hard expression on his face. Zulay stepped forward barefoot, her wrapper dusty, eyes hollow. Her voice trembled, but it carried across the crowd. I have wronged this village, she began. I have wronged the spirits. And I have wronged Amina. Gasps rippled through the crowd. I poisoned my closest friend. I watched her fade before me. I buried the evidence and claimed her place. Mothers clutched their daughters tighter. The herbalist, Baba Oro, closed his eyes and began humming a low tune. Zulay continued. I was driven by envy. Her happiness reminded me of my own emptiness. I thought that if I had what she had, I would be whole. But instead, I invited her ghost into my bed, her cries into my walls, and her child's spirit into my sleep. Her knees gave way, and she dropped to the ground. Forgive me, she begged. Or punish me. But let her rest. The village was silent. Even the wind seemed to pause. Then the oldest elder, Mama Kofo, stood. Her voice was strong, ageless. You have spoken the truth. But truth does not erase blood. It only begins the cleansing. A goat was slaughtered as sacrifice. The blood was sprinkled around the compound's four corners. Elders chanted into the soil, calling on the spirits of the ancestors to witness the confession. But it was not enough. That night, Zulay sat alone by the fire when Alameda approached. He said nothing at first, only stared at her like a stranger. You killed her, he finally said, voice low. And still I married you. Tears filled her eyes. I lied to you. I lied to everyone. Did you love me? He asked. I didn't know what love was until it turned into grief. He said nothing for a while, then turned to leave. I'm leaving at dawn. This house, this marriage. I can't stay. Zulay watched him walk away, and something inside her crumbled. She had lost her friend, her honor, her husband, and soon, the house itself. But even after all that, the spirits had not left. At midnight, the crying returned, this time louder, urgent. She ran to the back room, heart racing. There, in the moonlight pouring through the cracked roof, stood Amina again, closer this time. Her face held no anger, only sorrow. "You confessed," she whispered. "But that alone does not free us. What more must I do?" Zulay cried. Amina pointed to the floor. "Beneath the hearth. The earth still holds what you buried." Zulay's eyes widened. The final truth, the poisoned bottle, the dried herbs, the last thread of her sin, was still hidden. She knew then what must come next. The haunting would not stop until everything she buried, physically and spiritually, was brought into the light. And some things, once unearthed, might destroy her for good. She murdered her closest friend and claimed her home, if only she had realized. Unearthing the forbidden, Zulay waited for the first rooster's crow before entering the kitchen. Her limbs were heavy, but her mind was clear. She now knew the haunting would never end until she brought out what she had buried, the truth hidden beneath the hearth. She fetched a rusted spade and knelt before the cracked kitchen floor. The hearth was cold, the ashes undisturbed. She took a breath and began to dig. Each scoop brought memories rushing back: Amina's laughter, the final cup of tea, the panic when she watched her friend collapse. Soon, the spade hit something hard. A small, wrapped bundle. She set it down gently, hands trembling. It was wrapped in old cloth, stiff with time. Slowly, she unrolled it. Inside were the dried herbs she had bought from a traveling medicine man, mixed with powdered root and venom from a forest snake. The bottle that had once contained the poisoned brew lay beside it, its cork blackened. But that was not all. There was also a locket, Amina's locket, containing a tiny carved figure of a woman holding a child. Zulay had forgotten she had taken it. She wept as she held the figure. "I didn't deserve her friendship," she whispered. Suddenly, the air around her grew colder. A soft breeze moved through the kitchen, though the windows were shut. She looked up, and there they stood. Amina and the child, this time clearer than ever, bathed in a pale blue light. The child stood beside his mother, small hand curled around her gown. Zulay bowed her head. "I found everything. I'll burn it. I'll tell the whole truth again before the ancestors." Amina stepped forward and reached toward the bundle. Her fingers passed through it, but the bundle began to glow faintly. Then, for the first time, Amina smiled. "You have begun to heal the wound," she said softly. "But your redemption lies not only in truth, but in surrender." "Surrender?" Zulay asked. "You must leave this place. It was never yours. You must let go of everything you stole. Only then will the spirits rest." Zulay's heart ached. The house, the compound, the title of wife, it would all have to go. Everything she had clawed for, lost her soul for, would be gone. But what was it worth, if the spirits would never let her sleep? She nodded slowly. "I will leave." By morning, she stood before the elders once more. She laid the bundle before them, the locket, the herbs, the bottle. She told them what lay beneath the earth, how she had dug it up, how Amina's spirit had spoken to her again. "I leave this house," she declared. "I surrender everything I took." The elders murmured, some in awe, some in horror. Baba Oro stepped forward. "She speaks truth. The land will no longer cry if she leaves it. But she must go before the next full moon." Zulay packed only one wrapper and a bag of dried maize. Alameda did not come to see her off. The compound felt silent, but no longer suffocating. As she stepped out of the compound gates for the last time, the wind whispered through the trees, and with it, a final sound. The faint giggle of a child and a woman's voice, humming a lullaby. Amina and her child were finally fading. But Zule's journey had only just begun.